third session of Investing with Purpose, all about impact investing, a type of investing that's really on the rise now. And it's an avenue that allows investors to use their capital for good. So it's based on the premise that investing can do a lot more than just make yourself money, but also do a lot of good in the process. So each week we will be learning about how we can use even small amounts of money to generate measurable positive impacts on so many different levels, environmentally, socially, economically, alongside that financial return. So in each session, we will be joined by leaders of impact investment fund managers who inspire us and they inspire change and bring innovative solutions to today's many, many pressing challenges. So today's session specifically is all about understanding equity and diversity for fair financing. So looking at how to know when investor support for diverse groups is actually effective and how we're actually able to track the impact of those details. So before we dive in, we will start today's session with a land acknowledgement. The Fair Finance Fund is based in Ontario, and Ontario, we must acknowledge, is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, Wendat peoples, and is currently home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people currently. And beyond that, we always like to acknowledge that we are able to communicate today utilizing the technology we have, our computers, laptops, internet, lighting, all of these materials and resources that we have. These resources come often from land, traditional or indigenous lands or traditional lands or previously traditional lands. So it's important to recognize and be grateful for not just the land we physically are on, but the fact that we're able to communicate like this in this day and age, and all the support that we've had, and all the resources that we have, and just be grateful for them. So taking a moment for that before we begin to recognize how fortunate we are. And so we will dive in to today's session. First, we'll be joined by Jiang from WOSEN, and then second, Narinder, Dhami from New Power Labs. And at the end, we'll have an option for you to ask all your questions as they come up. So as they come up, feel free to write them in the chat, or you can write them at the end, but all questions will be answered at the very end of both presentations. And then we'll have a moment for some time at the end for to speak with Lee and Narinder a bit more in breakout rooms. So before we dive in, I will pass it off to Janessa for a couple of tech announcements.
All right. First off, again, I'd just like to thank you all for coming today. So just to do some housekeeping here. First, you'll notice that all attendees will be muted upon entry, just so we don't get any feedback or background noise while our speakers are talking. We are recording right now for future use and reference, but we aren't going to be recording any of the individual questions or names of people asking, but we will only just have the presentation and the speakers. If you have any questions, please write them in the chat. As Dee mentioned, we will have a Q&A period after all our speakers are done. And if any of you have any technical difficulties, then please send me, Janessa, a message or send an email at info@fairfinancefund.org. And I'll bring it back to you, Dee.
Amazing, thank you so much. So we will start off with our first speaker. We're so excited to have Lee with us today. And Lee works in the impact investing field on many fronts. And one of these is leading the Startup Incubator and Accelerator programs with WOSEN, which stands for Women of Ontario Social Enterprise Network. as well as UCEF, which stands for Upper Canada Equity Fund. So she's worked in the finance industry for over a decade, and during this time has been privileged to be engaged with hundreds of businesses, public companies, and startups. So she's very excited about the growing social finance and impact investing sector. But also understands that social ventures have significant challenges and there's still a long way to go. So we're super excited to have Lee here with us today to speak all about her experience and this topic of equity and diversity. So without further ado, I'll stop sharing my screen and hand it over to Lee.
Thank you so much, Dee. Let me share my screen. Do you see it okay?
Perfect.
Okay, first of all, I feel really honored to speak in today's session, and I'm also here to learn. And I see Narinder, the next speaker, as my dear mentor in the impact investing journey. So thank you very much for inviting me in today's session. A little bit about me, just a little bit more. So currently I am WOSEN Eastern Ontario Program Lead and SVX Lead. I have led 11 incubator and accelerator programs over the past 2 years, and I have done lots of work with social enterprises and nonprofit organizations. And I also have a background in finance and social sector management. A little bit more about WOSEN. What is WOSEN? So it is Women of Ontario Social Enterprise Network. It is a collaboration effort of 5 nonprofit organizations across Ontario, including Pillar Nonprofit Organization, Center for Social Innovation, SVX, which is Social Venture Connection, and Nordic Institute. We also have Link for Flourishing, support all of our content. And this is a 4-year project founded by Canada. Currently, we are in our 4th year. We just finished our third fiscal year by March 31st. And in the early design of WOSEN programs, we had a lot of discussion among regional leads, program leads about what is WOSEN's purpose. And we come up with a purpose that is a common understanding. This WOSEN's purpose is to model a new vision for entrepreneurship system that are inclusive, safe, and supportive, and enable diverse women and non-binary people to achieve their goals in life and in their change-making endeavors. We are leveraging our positions of privilege in our institutions to push against barriers to allow for space to create change, and believe that engaging in this new model will have spillover effect for the entrepreneurs who engage in their startups efforts to influence other systems. And through the past 3 years, we have delivered over 40 regional and provincial incubator and accelerator programs for social entrepreneurs, and also system design, system change programs for founders and ecosystem developers. And we have supported and built trust with over 700 participants from 120 communities. And 97% of these participants come from the underrepresented groups. Our investment readiness support program, which is one of the many WOSEN programs, have supported 15 marginalized entrepreneurs to get access to over $5 million in funding from investors and funders. And the GROW program, which just finished several months ago, most recently, it is another WOSEN program, received a net promoter score of 9.6 out of 10. And this is some of the program feedback we received from the participants. And from these feedback, we can say positively that the WOSEN programs have made a difference to these social enterprises. As a facilitator who design and deliver these programs, this work also transformed my view on social entrepreneurship and my view on how to make investments. Today, I want to share 5 of my learning and reflections I got from this work. Because daily I work with women entrepreneurs, so some of these learning and reflections are about women and non-binary entrepreneurs. So first of all, the first learning and reflection is the scarcity is real. I believe because we have 2 sessions previously in previous 2 weeks, I believe many of you are familiar with the facts in the funding landscape that despite the fact that women entrepreneurs outperform their male counterparts on measures such as revenue generation, job creation, and overall business performance and growth, startups that lead by women entrepreneurs receive little funding support. Venture capital investments into women-led companies made up only 2.8% of the total investment in 2019. And in 2020, overall deal activities for women-led startups have actually decreased. And at the same time, private market has grown in dollar amount exponentially. For example, ESG funds, which is funds that focus on the issue in environment, social, and governance, has captured $51 billion new dollar from investors in 2020, which were more than doubled the prior year, which is 2019. And after a lot of research, I come to this conclusion that the system is not lacking capital or resources or the awareness of the challenges the underrepresented entrepreneurs are facing. The system is lacking love, empathy, compassion, and connection. However, don't let these data and the picture of scarcity discourage you. From my observation, there are a lot we as system builders can do, and there are a lot social entrepreneurs can do. And that comes to my third learning and reflection, find the resourcefulness, leveraging community assets. Social entrepreneurs are able to find the resourcefulness within them and around them. Specifically on the one hand, as system builders, we can help entrepreneurs to acknowledge their positions in the system, to recognize barriers, and to facilitate connections. And on the other hand, I discovered that these value-aligned social entrepreneurs are eager to support each other. They share resources, they share their network with each other, and form accountable communities. In fact, during our WOSEN programs, the many WOSEN programs I led, there are quite a few business partnership, advisory collaboration, referral investment take place and were born in our Zoom breakout rooms. I'll give you one example. So Kelly Emery is one of our WOSEN participants. She is the founder of Troop, T-R-O-P, the company. And the mission of the business is to bring neighbors together to unleash generosity in community. By identifying these big corporations and their employees as valuable community stakeholders and include them in her business model, Kelly multiplied Troop's community outreach channels and enabled a group of givers and change makers in these communities. And also, her business has secured a large amount of venture capital funding during last year. And my fourth learning and reflection from the work with WOSEN is use design principles to transform your incubator and accelerator programs. To begin with, I found that for investment funds, having incubator and accelerator programs alongside their investment activities is extremely helpful, both to investors and the social entrepreneurs, because a noticeable difference between a traditional investment and an impact investment is really the relational piece rather than the transactional piece in the decision-making process. However, from my observation, I found that the power dynamic exists in many incubator and accelerator programs. And this power dynamic amplifies the privileges of a small group of entrepreneurs who really benefit from this business support and from this system, but deserve and discourage those group of underrepresented or marginalized entrepreneurs who have brilliant ideas, but and want to make the world a better place. And for us, WOSEN have 7 design principles, and they act as the fundamental building blocks when design and deliver our programs. These 7 design principles are, you can see on the right side of the slide: inclusive and accessible, responsive, decolonized, human-centered, system-informed, anti-oppressive, and ecosystem approach. And I think by practicing these principles, we were really able to greatly remove these or mitigate these power dynamics. I am a huge advocate of these design principles and have shared it with many of the ecosystem stakeholders in details. And I have really received many appreciation and positive messages from these practitioners running other programs outside of WOSEN, telling me how much they love it and how setting these customized design principles for their programs have transformed the way they deliver the programs. And I know as a fact that Fair Finance found in your new program design, you also adopted this practice. You used your customized design principle in your programs. I would also love to hear and learn your thoughts on this later if we have time. And my last learning and reflection, but not the least, is create a shared vision. Create a shared vision means that impact investors and entrepreneurs share their values more intentionally when they do business. And both entrepreneurs and impact investors become more open about the challenge they're facing. These genuine conversations really create genuine connections. And based on the demands of the entrepreneurs, investors should be open to offer mentorship, provide advisory services. This means that it is not investors who give money to startups, rather a shared understanding that there is a two-way value creation through the investment process. By investing capital into the business through its service or products is helping shape a better future for both parties and the next generations to live in. And this approach really promotes transparency and significantly mitigate investment risks and create trust in the partnership over a longer term between the investors and investees. And I would like to finish my part with a quote I got from the book I really, really love, The Soul of Money. So here's the quote: I challenge you to move the resources that flew through your life towards your highest commitment and ideals, those things you stand for. I challenge you to hold money as a common trust that we are all responsible for, using in ways that nurture and empower us and all life, our planet, and all future generations. I challenge you to imbue your money with soul, your soul, and let it stand for who you are, your love, your heart, your word, and your humanity. And that is the end of my part. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lee. That was fantastic. And that last quote just blew it over the top. I literally am about to write down the book Soul of Money because I think I have to read that now. And it's so true.
One of my favorite books.
That's amazing. I'm actually gonna literally write it down right now. But it's so true. I think we have more power than we realize with our money, even if it's very little. With even the things that we buy on a day-to-day basis, it's like the way that we frame our money allows us to make changes in ways that we don't even think. So that's so powerful. And I think those reflections are super powerful as well, in that the whole ecosystem when it comes to diversity is so complex, that there's so many factors to take into account. So those are amazing. Thank you so much, Lee. And I'm excited to, in the Q&A period, to hear more. I'm gonna ask about that book. But so we will continue on. I will share my screen again. There we go. There we go. Perfect. Can everyone see again? Good. Okay, awesome. So we are super excited as well to have Narinder Dhami with us today. So she is a Canada Top 40 Under 40 2019 honoree, and has worked across sectors and silos, bringing depth, perspective, and rigor to her work in both North America and in the Global South. So currently she is the president of the Sonar Foundation, executive lead of New Power Labs, and managing partner at Marigold Capital, and an advisor to Justice Fund. So she's gotten her hands in many pies. She's working in a lot of places, and it's fantastic. She's also been recognized as a BMW Foundation responsible leader, and across the last decade, she designed and scaled 2 social ventures. As managing director, she built LEAP and the Cult Center for Social Impact, and an innovator in venture philanthropy. And as the founding executive director of Rise Asset Development, she built a micro fund for individuals with a history of mental health and addiction challenges. So we are so excited to have Narinder with us today. So without further ado, I will hand it off to her. And I think you have some slides, so I'll let you share your screen and all that fun stuff.
Thank you. It's really great to be here. Can folks see my screen? Okay, awesome. And I have not read, oh, that doesn't work. I have not read the book yet, Soul Money, but I did write it down as my next read. So thank you for that recommendation. So I am speaking, I do have a few hats on, and in some ways are all related, because I think a lot about capital and access to capital, in particular when we have growing inequality, climate change, wars, COVID, the impacts of COVID. The scale of challenges we're facing requires a similarly scaled and equitable response, which unfortunately we don't always see in how capital flows. So I will talk today a bit about capital flow, about impact investing, some mindset shifts that I find helpful in how we can build more equitable spaces. And I'll add that, when I think about equity, and I think many of you probably feel the same, it's equity across a diverse set of diversities. So whether it's gender, ethnicity, ability, sexual orientation, rural, minority languages, it's really taking that holistic lens, because what we see when we look at the data is that the communities that are excluded from capital are consistently excluded from all types of capital. And these are the diverse communities. So again, with the hat off, New Power Labs, I'm the executive lead of New Power Labs, and we are, there we go, a partnership to build a more transparent, inclusive, and equitable financial future. We have a growing group of founding partners that include World Education Services, the Maria SF Fund, Coast Capital, Trillium, Ontario Trillium Foundation, Duca Credit Union, and Community Foundations of Canada. And we got together last year, actually collectively, and started thinking about action toward equity, and recognizing that when we think about equity and we think about the work that we do to advance equity, it's often fragmented, siloed, and slow. And we see, a lot of performance when it comes to equity, diversity days, Black squares, and so forth, but we don't necessarily see that translate into meaningful action. And so at New Power Labs, our vision is a society in which all Canadians have access to equitable access to capital. And our work centers around accelerating this through collaborative research, convenings, education, and benchmarking. And we are a very new nonprofit. One of my colleagues, Adam, is in the audience here, and we're building out our team and building out our work. So expect to hear more from us as we move forward. But the place that I usually start at is a space in which impact investing sits, which is combining purpose and profits, meaning and money. And I'm sure you've heard this terminology before, but this idea that we can do more and we could do things differently if we start thinking about different types of capital, profit, and sustainability in different ways that can help achieve our social goals. And a little bit about me, and so thank you for that introduction. I do have a few different hats on, so just a little context. So I spoke a little bit about New Power Labs. The Stoner Foundation is a private family foundation, and Justice Fund is a nonprofit that is thinking and kind of pushing on how do we support communities that have been underfunded and overlooked, and doing a ton of work on the philanthropy side, but we're also working on how do you translate that into impact investing. And then Marigold Capital is a very small impact investment fund. We're invested in 7 companies. We did close the fund, and the companies all apply a gender or social equity lens approach in their work. And so, thinking about not only representation when it comes to gender and racial diversity, but also around looking at the products and services that these companies are creating, their internal processes and policies that they hold, and a more holistic look and view of impact. I'm going to go through a little bit of data to start. And now I'll preface that the data that I'll go through is going to look at all types of capital, because that's the vantage point, but we're going to bring it back into impact investing. So this is what the makeup looks like in Canada on an ethnicity basis. And it's actually surprisingly, a lot of people don't realize some of the how large I think South Asian Chinese is as part of Canada. So we're at about 10%. And then obviously Indigenous 5%, Black communities 3.5%, and then white and Caucasian about 73%. I want you to keep that data in mind as we look through how capital flows. So 90% of deals by Canadian venture funds across the last 5 years went to companies exclusively founded by men. And this is slightly outdated data, but 2019. And so this, again, back to Lee's point on female and gender being actually a more challenging journey if you are a woman or a non-binary to access capital, the data shows that. Black founders received just 1.3% of venture capital funding in 2021. This is US data, and you'll see a theme here is that I do reference a lot of US data because they actually collect better disaggregated data than Canada does, which is an opportunity, I think, for us to do better. Women-led companies received 2% of venture capital. So again, building on what Lee said, this was the latest data in 2021. So our trajectory is going the wrong way. It's the smallest percentage share since 2016. Now, back to Lee's point, the total pool of venture capital funding has increased. In 2021, just broke records, but the percentage that went to women went down. Canadian foundations, let's take it back into impact investing. So Canadian foundations almost exclusively invest in white or male fund managers. And so these are foundations that are engaging in impact investing, that are publicly sharing who they're investing in. And that same bias that we see in who gets access to capital comes out. 46% of Aboriginal businesses face restrictions to access to capital. For every $100 donated to charities, 7 to 30 cents goes toward supporting Black charities. And again, philanthropy, not impact investing, but shows the way in which capital flows is excluding the same type of individuals, and those are individuals that hold a diverse identity. And then in Indigenous communities, again, back into the philanthropy side, receive about 5.5% charitable funds in Canada. And not only is it lower than the percentage of Indigenous communities we have in Canada, but it's also not equivalent to some of the barriers Indigenous communities face across our country. So a little bit of stats just to kind of position us on our opportunity to flow capital more equitably. And I deeply believe that impact investing is a space where we have the right intentionality. You know, we're good people doing good work to really start to shift how capital flows. This is a responsible investing umbrella. I imagine many of you have seen this. And there's, I would say, a lot of confusion on terminology, on language, on what we use when. So you'll see a lot of folks say impact investing when they really mean ESG integration or socially responsible investing. But ESG integration, I'm going to start there, is part of this responsible investment umbrella. And actually most of the capital, and we'll go into some data around there, but 25 trillion of $35 trillion sits within ESG integration. And what ESG integration is the explicit consideration of environmental, social, and governance factors in the investment decision-making process. So what this really is good due diligence. It's good business. So again, you know, is it impact investing? I would say no. Does it get lumped into this kind of bigger box of impact investing? Yes, all the time. But this is kind of the most common approach of application of ESG you see. The next is socially responsible investing. So those are strategies that include or exclude investments based on the application of positive or negative screens, which come from your defined value set. Again, more growing space here. And then the part that I get really excited about is this impact and philanthropy space. So in impact investing, you know, you're targeting investments, particularly in private markets that are aimed at solving a social and environmental problem. And in philanthropy, again, is directly linked to impact investing because a lot of social enterprises look and secure non-dilutive capital through grants to be able to launch and often to be able to support their work. So this is where I'm going to just pass through some data again on the opportunity in this space and why I believe the opportunity is an impact in private markets. And that's some of the work that I've done. And then you see socially responsible investing and ESG integration is well, you'll see more of that in the public market space. So again, 35 of the 35 trillion invested in sustainability, 25 trillion is ESG integration. So that means good diligence. You know, there's some conversation on who is a good ESG company. Philip Morris is a company that sells 700 billion cigarettes a year. They are a well-rated ESG company and is part of the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. For me, that was a bit of a shocker. So I can't see faces, but I imagine it might be for you as well. You know, this unfortunate and tragic war that's happening, and early in that conversation, Europe was discussing whether weapons should be listed as an ESG asset. Not the way I would think of ESG, but again, this is where that flexibility on definition, on terminology, and plays in. And then the fact that there is funding and access to capital for ESG funds and ESG, highly rated ESG companies. So how does that shift what we consider ESG? And I'm sure you've heard about greenwashing, impact washing within the space. You know, one of the other elements is that ESG funds often fail to vote their values. And so this is some MIT research that says that index funds, so like the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, don't always vote in alignment with shareholder preferences. And there's ways to change it. And there's actually organizations across Canada like Share who are trying to change this and actually start to to have voting more aligned with the interests of investors. Impact investment favor expats over African entrepreneurs. Again, so they looked at investments in Africa, and 90% of capital went to startups with one or more European or North American founder. And so opportunity there. Foundations fail to invest in diverse fund managers, and we see this in Canada. Opportunity here as well on how do we, as foundations, as folks within the social impact ecosystem, start to live our values through how we flow our capital. And all of that goes to hopefully painting a picture of an opportunity for us to do better, to flow capital more equitably, to understand what isn't working, and to put in the right tools, structures, transparency, accountability to shift how capital flows. Because at the end of the day, capital is power, and power is concentrated and exclusionary. So this is a peer organization that is in the US, in the UK, and they are, it's called Equality Impact Investing Project. I highly recommend folks to go and take a look. They have an entire handbook on how you can think about your internal processes on impact, how you can think of your policies. And why I share this is because they have created this really, I think, effective graphic. And they talk about this idea that there is no such thing as an equality neutral investor or investment. And the impact of investments on inequality will depend on the extent to which investors make conscious choices and efforts to avoid the negative and to support the positive, the orange and the green. And they say that when we do not actively challenge systemic bias, oppression, racism, and how capital flows, we're actually enabling these structures and behaviors. So if you're not proactively trying to change the system, you're supporting the current system and supporting those inequalities. And going back to what we can do, as folks in the social impact sector, there's a social psychologist, Dr. Dolly Jiang. I highly recommend her TED Talk, and she talks about this view on binary. We have a binary view on ourselves. We're good people or we're bad people. And so if we're good people, we can never be racist or sexist or hold any unconscious bias or, do anything that would create harm. And it's this binary mindset that prevents us to progress. And so because if we think we're good people and we hold none of this bias, then it's really going to be hard for us to evolve and grow and learn. And so what she does is she recommends embracing another mindset, a goodish mindset, understanding that we're all across this journey. We all hold bias. I am an engineer, I prefer engineers, and there's a ton of other bias I hold, but that's an easier one to articulate. But this idea of we're all on this journey of being goodish. And we can recognize that we all hold bias. We all have some work to do in particular. What I care about is flowing capital more equitably, but in our daily lives, in the way we purchase, in the way we support our community, in the decisions we make on hiring, in all of this, we have an opportunity to be better. And so moving out of the binary into a journey idea and being goodish. So highly recommend her TED Talk. So I'm going to end with a final note on what next. So I talked about two mindset shifts. So this one shift on understanding that if we're not doing anything, we're actually contributing to the inequality that we see. And then the second is around the goodish. So again, I encourage us all to understand our own biases. As a woman of color, I still hold bias, and proactively try to address those. And then the third thing, and I realize this is a bit blurry and it's likely blurry on your screen as well, so I can send this over to the team afterwards, but we are hosting a conversation in the first week of May. So in partnership with SETC and SIA, Social Innovation Academy, New Power Labs worked on some research last summer, understanding the state of equity, diversity, and inclusion across impact investments impact investors in Canada and social impact accelerators. So the report is called In the Dark. Might be giving some of it away, but In the Dark, and we'll send out the link, and we encourage you to join us as we share our learnings through that journey. And so that's in about 2 weeks. So I'm going to pause there, but thank you so much, and look forward to getting deeper into the conversation.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Narinder. There were so many good points during your presentation, and one thing that really stuck out to me was what you said about the goodish and our binary way of thinking about things. And I think things are getting more and more polarized in our current situation. And when we look at someone from a very human perspective, like they're just another human doing their best, and we can all make better decisions. So I think that really puts everyone on such a more human level. And even people who are running these funds that, you know, that what you mentioned about the weapons being classified as ESG, somewhere in their mind, they're thinking that's a good thing. And obviously there are better choices that can be made, but once we bring someone to that human level, can be like, okay, maybe there's other options. And I think that's so important, because then things just become more polarized, and then where's the future path? It's like we kind of need to become a collective to make that change, right? So thank you, that was amazing, and I'm gonna look up that TED Talk.